Hey everyone. So I just received my new Feenix Autore and Feenix Nascita from FeenixCollection.com. And I've seen a few reviews around for the Nascita, but nothing for the Autore yet. So I figured I'd toss up a quick, first impressions review video. So I've had these both for about a week now, and I'm really starting to like them. The Nascita actually has some of the best contours for, a right-handed mouse user that I've seen so far in gaming mice. And I know actually Team Coast, which is in the North American LCS for League of Legends, just picked up Nascita as a sponsorship, and I believe they've had nothing but good things to say about that as well. So onto the keyboard. The Autore is a mechanical keyboard, which means it doesn't use rubber dome switches, which is sort of the cheaper, more common switch type for keyboards today, especially for a full-size keyboard like this. You'll usually see, if you were to take the keycaps off, these rubber domes that sort of mush down and make contact for a keystroke. So the advantage for having a mechanical keyboard is that each of these keys has a switch dedicated to it on the bottom that has a spring, and it's mechanical in that sense. And it feels a lot nicer. These were originally sort of Cherry Corporation made these switches to emulate the IBM Model M buckling spring, which is to say the clicky keyboards that are old that you probably have seen at some point in your life. The Cherry switches are different, but that's not to say necessarily that they're worse. There's definitely a different feel you get from typing on something like this keyboard. You'll notice it is still pretty loud to type on, which is sort of something that comes along with a mechanical keyboard. That's largely because you've got the switches bottom out, and you get the sound of the keycap hitting the switch itself, which definitely has a bit of an appeal to it, especially when you get typing quickly. You get this sort of clickety-clackety sound. That's pretty cool. So for the design of the keyboard itself, it is actually one of the coolest parts of it, in my opinion. It's got this sort of like monolithic, I think that's the way one of the wired writers put it, design. It's very clean corners, sharp edges kind of thing. The back is pretty straightforward, just, a few feet flat. But it's different from this sort of business look that a lot of these other keyboards have, where it's sort of none of these sharp corners, none of the clean design of this. It's just sort of looks boring, if that makes sense. And I've got an example of that coming up, actually. But the surface of it, there's like a Feenix logo here. The surface of it is, I believe, aluminum coated, and it feels a little bit heavy as a result, but that's sort of the nature of mechanical keyboards in general, tend to be heavier like that, and I really don't think it's a bad thing, because you're not really going to be lugging this thing around with you, since it's a full-size keyboard. The keycaps themselves are actually kind of interesting. There's a very thin sort of dark gray to black type that you can see on them. I don't know if it'll come through too clearly. But it's very sort of classy looking in person, because it doesn't have these like bold pad printed keys on there. From far away it looks blank, which is actually sort of a very cool thing to have going on for this keyboard. And I believe they're silk screened keycaps for putting the letters on them, and then they're sort of coated on top of that so that they don't wear down. And I believe the website also mentions that the keycaps themselves are, the coating on the keycaps makes them, and the material they're made of, makes them sort of a slightly heavier than normal keycap, which compared to the DOS keyboard Silent, which has browns on it as well, I actually think this has a much nicer typing feel, because it's not, you don't notice how sort of the mushiness of the point where the key actuates as much. It sort of feels a little bit smoother, if that makes sense, but you can still definitely feel that there's a point at which the key has been pressed. There's that sort of bump. So that's what the brown switches are. They don't make a noise when they actuate, but you can sort of feel it. In contrast to that, the blue switches are, and this is a Rosewood keyboard I've had for a bit, are very clearly, they click even just at the point where you hit them. However, these aren't really great for gaming, considering that one, if you're playing a game where you're spamming a button over and over, you're just making a lot of noise, but also they have a different actuation point from release point, so you can't actually like double click very effectively on it necessarily, or very quickly as a result of that, because you have to really go through the whole keystroke and let go, as opposed to just pressing a little bit of it. Also, this is a pretty good example of these sort of like bold letters that don't really come across as too subtle, and the sort of edges are just very... It just looks like sort of a business keyboard, something you have on your desk at work. Not bad for typing, which is why I've got it, but certainly not a gaming keyboard. So then red switches, which this is a Leopold 10 keyless, which means it doesn't have the pad on the side. These are sort of the same in that they don't make a noise when they actuate, like the brown switches, but they also don't have a bump. So some people consider these pretty much ideal for gaming. These red switches and black switches sort of are the same thing, but not for typing. And actually typing on them is a little bit... It's a strange feeling, and you have to sort of get used to it. I don't type as quickly on reds as I do with browns, which is something I do like about the Autore. But the Autore's been pretty good for gaming so far, honestly. You might look at the brown switches as being sort of a compromise, but if you're gonna, pay money for a mechanical keyboard, that might not be the worst thing anyway. And honestly, like I was saying, since it's smoother, it does kind of feel like reds when you're gaming. You can feel the bump, which is nice, and for typing, it's definitely better than the red switches. So that pretty much covers anything I had. Oh, I suppose one thing that's pretty cool that I didn't note. Along with this keyboard, just like the other two keyboards I've got there, is plate mounted. And there's this sort of gold plate between the keys that you might be able to see here. Although one thing that is notable that Feenix mentions on its site is that it's very spill resistant. So that's it sounds like they've sort of put some work into that, and that's actually pretty great considering that if you didn't have a plate there and it was just straight to the circuit board, not only are these keycaps harder to take off in that sense, which either way you need a keycap puller, but now you're not at risk of pulling the switch off of the board, and the sort of the plate protecting the circuit board underneath from spills is really ideal if you're not wanting to ruin this expensive keyboard you just bought. The only thing other than that is, I suppose, these lights on the side, which are pretty nice. They sort of go nicely with the design. There's not much to be said about that, caps lock, scroll lock, num lock. But other than that, I definitely encourage you guys to check it out if you're looking to get into mechanical keyboards, and especially if you want a mechanical gaming keyboard, because, I mean, it's just a nicer build quality, in my opinion, than the DOS keyboards and the Razer Black Widow sort of type of keyboard. So that pretty much covers the thoughts I've got on the Feenix Autore. If you've got any of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments, and check out feenixcollection.com if you're interested in picking one.